What was plan B for St. Ignatius after his plan to stay in Jerusalem did not work out? Was Ignatius suspected to be a secret agent? What was Ignatius's relationship to the poor? And why was Ignatius imprisoned for over 1 month? This and more we will learn on this episode 7 of St. Ignatius of Loyola, Getting to Know Him. So our acronym this time around is VIX. Kind of had to stretch this one out a little bit, but VIX, you know, when I was growing up in Nigeria, we had this product, and I think it's available here in the US as well. But it's this kind of menthol product that you take a little bit and you rub it on your chest or on your back if you have a cold or sometimes a sore throat. And it's really very soothing, but at the same time, it has a very pungent odor, you know, so kind of hard to take sometimes. So the acronym is VIX for us, huh? And the V kind of doubles up with voyage. So Ignatius is continuing his voyage, mostly by boat. And V also includes kind of a vulnerable, to talk about Ignatius's relationship with the poor, huh? The I is for inspection. More to come about this. Ignatius was thoroughly inspected, but we'll say some more about this a little bit later. The C is really for his commitment to his studies. Also, he did get involved with a captain as he was being inspected. So that C can double up for both. And then the S is suspect. Ignatius was under a cloud of suspicion because of some of his activity. So we'll say a lot more about each of these coming up in a moment. So let's talk a little bit about the first V, huh? Ignatius on this voyage, right? So Ignatius travels by boat. He's trying to make his way from Cipro to Venice. And he mentions in his account that there were 3 or 4 boats that were making their way to Venice. And one of the boats belonged to a very rich person. And some of the people who were with Ignatius, I guess who had accompanied him sometime along his way, were trying to plead with the captain of this boat to let Ignatius on because they thought he was a saint. Now, it's interesting that they already felt this about him at this time. Well, the captain did not even want to hear about this because he knew Ignatius did not have any money. In fact, he kind of taunted him. You know, he said, you know, why doesn't Ignatius just kind of make his way to Venice, you know, like the myth of some of our saints, like St. James? Well, Ignatius gives the account that boat of this rich person did not make it to the other city. It was actually drowned and destroyed in a tempest, along with a couple of the other boats. The small boat in which Ignatius was able to alight actually made its way to its destination. This also gives us a sense of the context, right? Because we're talking about the 16th century. Transportation was kind of perilous, huh? When Ignatius arrived at his destination in mid-January, he had been at sea since November. So almost 2.5 months making his way to this new destination. He even arrived during winter and didn't have enough clothes, you know, to protect himself in the winter. But just to give us a sense of the context of St. Ignatius. So Ignatius, having made his way to his destination, began to consider, what am I gonna do? You know, what do I do now that my first plan has changed? And then it came to mind that he wanted to actually dedicate himself to some studies in order to help souls, and he made a decision to go to Barcelona. So while he was on his way, one day, having gotten some help from people around, um, a poor man came up to him to beg him for something. And so Ignatius gave him something. And then another poor person came. And then another poor person came. And before you knew it, Ignatius was surrounded by a whole bunch of folks. And well, he gave until he ran out of money. And then this is what Ignatius said to them, please forgive me. I don't have any more to give. So it gives us a sense of, Ignatius's relationship to the poor, how he just was so generous and gave all that he had. Does it look like I'm blending in with the sky? Well, let's carry on. So as Ignatius was trying to make his way to Barcelona, he was going from a city called Ferrera to Genoa. And while on his way, he met some soldiers who were kind to him. But when they heard of his destination, where he was trying to get to, they tried to dissuade him, telling him that he might fall into the hands of some French soldiers. But you know what? Ignatius did not listen. He went along his way. But this also tells us a little bit of the context, that this was a context of some conflict, right? And wars that were going on. Well, while Ignatius was on his way, he mentions getting to a city that was completely burned down. He did not find any single person who could help him with alms or give him food to eat. And as he kept going through this city, I think he spent the night, and when he woke up in the morning, some soldiers encountered him, and they thought he was a spy. This is from the first question, where was Ignatius ever suspected to be an agent? They did think that he was a spy. And do you know what happened to St. Ignatius? They actually stripped him down naked and inspected him completely. He even says they checked every part of his body to see if he was carrying some letters. You can see how humiliating that must have been. But then they said they have to, take him to their captain. And Ignatius asked if he could wear his clothes, and some of them actually said no. But then as they were taking him on the way, he says he had this vision of, of Jesus. And he felt happy, he felt contentment, actually. And so when he got to this captain of the guards, he had a little sort of interior dialogue, because Ignatius had this practice of when he talked to people, he would always, try to talk to them as he would even talk to Jesus, as he imagined Jesus talk to people. But when he heard he was going to this captain, he sort of felt this urge to be a little bit more deferent, but then he saw it as a temptation. And actually what happened is when he got to the captain kind of questioned him. And what Ignatius did was actually pause and be silent. And then he would say words with so many long spaces of silence in between that the captain thought that this guy is just crazy. And they let him go. There's so many little anecdotes along the way for Ignatius. He even mentions meeting a different captain who kind of stopped him and then asked him a few questions and found out that he was from Guipuscoa. And the captain was from around the same region, and so he treated him well. So there was, as I said, kind of a context of conflict, right? And a lot of suspicion along the way. Well, Ignatius eventually ended up in Barcelona. And when he got there, he actually sort of shared his desire to study with Isabel Roser, he mentions in particular, who was really a friend and a benefactor, a lady along the way, who even hosted him in her house a few times. And there was another fellow, Mr. Ardevol, who taught him grammar along the way. Well, while Ignatius was in Barcelona, he decided to put diligence, and to really study. But then he discovered that sometimes when he would want to study, there would be these spiritual thoughts that would come to his mind, and he'd get carried away in all of this spiritual stuff. But then he kind of examined it and he thought, during Mass, I don't even have these kinds of spiritual thoughts. And so he sort of felt that it was a temptation. So he went into a church in Barcelona called Santa Maria del Mar, Mary of the Ocean, huh? And I got to visit that church about 3 years ago. Incredible, impressive church. There's an image of Saint Ignatius in that church, and actually a bowl that Ignatius used for his begging along the way, right? In either case, Ignatius went into that church, and it was near where his teacher lived. So he decided to meet the teacher there. And in the church, he told the teacher and committed to being diligent in his studies and continuing to commit himself to it. And after this word of commitment, those temptations ceased. So, it could be a lesson in our lives that sometimes when we're going through some sorts of temptations or difficulties, it may require of us a firm commitment to doing the good, right? A firm commitment to fight against the desolation that we may experience. And we may find that we are lifted from that darkness or from that temptation or from that trial. So after Ignatius finished in Barcelona, he got to Barcelona around 1524. And after studying for a bit there, he wanted to learn the arts. And so he decided to go to another city, Alcalá. And when he got there, he was studying the arts, studying Albert the Great and all these great figures. And while he was there, there were people who helped him along the way with his studies, people who, helped him, giving him materials to be able to share with the poor who were around him. But one of the things that Ignatius began to do in Alcalá was he was giving the spiritual exercises to people. He was teaching Christian doctrine, and lots of people were gaining a lot of fruit from Ignatius's teaching, from doing the spiritual exercises. And, rumors started to spread about St. Ignatius, and his giving to the poor. Beyond Alcalá, all the way to Toledo, where they had, the Inquisition there. And so they actually sent people down. Figueroa is one of these figures who came down and they tried to examine his life and his doctrine. They really didn't find anything wrong with what he was doing or saying. But then he tried to inquire of them some more. And they actually had a few recommendations, They didn't want him to wear habits. And so at this time, actually, little known fact sometimes, Ignatius had actually brought around him a few companions, who kind of wore similar things, And so it was Ignatius, Arteaga, Calixto, Cárceres, Juanico, so there were about 5 people. These were the first companions before the actual companions who found the Society of Jesus. Well, after this first sort of inquiry into St. Ignatius, and him being under a cloud of suspicion, it did not cease entirely. I think there's a scripture passage that says, whenever we begin to do good, it seems that evil is at hand, or we start to have obstacles along the way. So this kind of cloud of suspicion continued for Saint Ignatius for a while. He kind of obeyed more or less what they told him to do in terms of the habits, but then there kept being other rumors. Figueroa actually, some priests even refused to give St. Ignatius the sacraments because he was coming every 8 days, to receive communion and to receive, confession as well. At some point, there was even a rumor that there was a woman who was like a married woman who would come sort of cover herself and visit St. Ignatius sometimes and then leave, and people thought something was happening and they inquired, and there was nothing going on there. And then while Ignatius, things kind of died down for a few months, and then a sheriff came and took St. Ignatius and put him under custody. And he was under custody for about 17 days. Now, it wasn't like he was kind of totally restricted. Some people were still coming in, and he would teach them and tell them about the spiritual exercises. And eventually, Figueroa, this inquisitor from Toledo, came to him and started to ask him, do you go to church on Sundays? Well, Ignatius was like, of course, yes. He said, do you know this mother and daughter? So he gave Figueroa gave him the names, and Ignatius said, yes. He said, oh, did you see them before they left the city? And he's like, no, I didn't see them, And so it was like, well, what do you know about them, So he eventually told the story because there was this mother and daughter who were kind of known figures in the city, and apparently they had done the exercises with Saint Ignatius, and at some point they had communicated to him that they wanted to go around the world and give away their things to the poor, and Ignatius had told them, don't don't do that, serve the poor people here in Alcala and follow Jesus, who is in the Blessed Sacrament. But, the two ladies actually ended up going away on this trip. Anyway, Figueroa was kind of happy that St. Ignatius was not behind all this, because someone who cared for those two ladies was the one who put pressure on them to put St. Ignatius, behind bars, so to speak. Well, some of Ignatius's companions came to visit and spend time with him because he got sick while he was there, and they took him to see a doctor, and then they brought him back, and I think they were able to go to the vicar of the city where he was, trying to make inquiries so they could let St. Ignatius get out of that place. But Ignatius was not really bothered about it, His whole feeling was like, the Lord for whose love I am here will free me if it is according to his will. In either case, from the inquiry from this vicar, what he said was he should wait and be in custody until the mother and daughter return and they can verify what St. Ignatius said, right? Well, after all this was verified and all the inquiries that they made of St. Ignatius and his life and his doctrine, you know what they finally told St. Ignatius? They told Ignatius, first of all, that he needs to dress like every other student, so he shouldn't kind of stand out with his own habit. And then the other thing they said is that they didn't allow him to kind of teach spiritual things and Christian teaching to others for a space of 4 years until he had finished his studies. And so for St. Ignatius, this was a really big blow because one of his primary missions was to help souls. And he thought, man, this has closed the door for me to do the thing that I want to do most, what I feel called by God to do. And so we see the experience of St. Ignatius as he begins trying to live this life, some of the obstacles that he faced. So Ignatius actually went on his way out of Alcala and trying to find a different place to do his studies. And while along his way, he actually met a bishop in Valladolid. And he actually went and told him everything that was happening and his case, and said he was going to keep the verdict that was given to him, even though he was outside of the jurisdiction. But this archbishop actually received him with great love, and knowing that he was going to a city, Salamanca, where he had some friends, he actually sent him with his blessing and gave him some money along the way. So we kind of see this, the beautiful picture of the church with those who were the inquisitors and trying to get, something on St. Ignatius, those who were blessing him and accompanying him along the way. So in our next episode, we'll continue to learn how things unfold in the life of St. Ignatius. So this has been episode 7 of St. Ignatius of Loyola, Getting to Know Him. AMDG, God bless you all.